I never thought a snowstorm in February would turn my peaceful life in Boulder, Colorado into an absolute nightmare. But that's exactly what happened when Patricia Hendricks decided to make me her personal enemy. My name is Daniel Harrison, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision for about 3 years before everything went sideways. The neighborhood seemed nice enough when I moved in. Clean streets, well-maintained homes, families that waved when you drove by. What I didn't realize was that beneath the surface of this picture-perfect community lurked an HOA president who treated her position like she was running a small dictatorship. Patricia was in her early 50s, with that trademark haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and a wardrobe that consisted entirely of pastel cardigans and khaki pants. She lived directly across the street from me, in a house that looked like it had been copied and pasted from a home decorating magazine. Every shrub was trimmed to geometric perfection. Every blade of grass appeared to be individually groomed, and her white picket fence literally sparkled in the sunlight. The problem started small. A notice in my mailbox about my trash cans being visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. A stern email about my lawn being a 1/4 inch taller than the HOA regulations allowed. A formal complaint because I had parked my truck in my own driveway instead of the garage for 2 consecutive nights. I tried to be reasonable, tried to follow the rules even when they seemed absurd, but Patricia always found something new to complain about. Then winter hit hard. Colorado winters are no joke, and that February brought one of the worst snowstorms Boulder had seen in years. The first real storm dumped about 14 inches overnight, and I woke up at 5 in the morning to start clearing my driveway before heading to work. I worked as a software engineer for a tech company downtown, and while I could work remotely, I had an important meeting that required me to be in the office. I bundled up, grabbed my snow shovel, and got to work. The sun wasn't even up yet, and the street was dead quiet except for the scraping of my shovel against the concrete. It took me about an hour to clear my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my house, as required by city ordinance. I made neat piles along the edges of my property, careful not to block the street or push snow onto my neighbors' yards. That's when I saw Patricia emerge from her house, already fully dressed despite the early hour, wielding her own shovel like a weapon. She started clearing her driveway, which was fine. But then I noticed something strange. Instead of piling her snow on her own property, she was deliberately walking across the street and dumping it at the end of my driveway. At first, I thought maybe I was seeing things. It was still dark and I was tired. But no, she made 3 more trips, each time carrying a shovel full of snow directly to my property and dumping it right where my driveway met the street. "Excuse me, Patricia," I called out, trying to keep my voice level. "What are you doing?" She looked up at me with this innocent expression that was clearly fake. "Oh, Daniel, I'm just clearing my driveway. The snow has to go somewhere." "Yeah, but why is it going onto my driveway? I just spent an hour clearing that." "Well, according to the HOA bylaws, snow removal must not obstruct public walkways or create hazards on personal property. My property doesn't have adequate space for snow storage, so I'm utilizing the available area. The available area is my driveway. Actually, the first 6 feet of your driveway is technically within the HOA's jurisdiction. You can check the bylaws if you'd like. Article 7, Section 12, Subsection C." I stood there, absolutely stunned. Was she serious? I pulled out my phone and actually looked up the HOA bylaws, which I had saved in my email from when I first moved in. I scrolled through the dense legal language until I found the section she mentioned. It said something about the HOA having jurisdiction over certain easements and property setbacks, but nothing about one homeowner being allowed to dump snow on another's property. "That's not what this says at all," I told her. "Interpretation is key, Daniel. As HOA president, I'm responsible for interpreting and enforcing these rules. If you have a complaint, you're welcome to submit it in writing at the next board meeting." The next board meeting wasn't for 3 weeks. By then, the snow would have melted and refrozen a dozen times. She knew exactly what she was doing. I was already running late for work, so I didn't have time to argue. I quickly reshoveled the section she had covered, threw my equipment in the garage, and rushed to get ready. By the time I left my house 20 minutes later, Patricia had dumped even more snow at the end of my driveway. I had to get out of my truck and shovel it again just to get to the street. I was fuming the entire drive to work. My meeting went terribly because I couldn't focus, and my boss noticed. When he asked what was wrong, I found myself venting about my insane HOA president, which made me sound petty and unprofessional. Great start to the day. When I got home that evening, I discovered that Patricia had been busy. Not only had she piled more snow onto my driveway throughout the day, but she had also left a formal notice on my door citing me for improper snow removal creating hazardous conditions. The notice included a grainy photo of my driveway covered in snow, conveniently not showing that she was the one who put it there. That night, I tried calling Patricia to resolve this reasonably. She didn't answer. I sent an email. No response. I even tried knocking on her door, but she peeked through the curtains and pretended not to be home, even though I could see her standing right there. The next morning brought another 4 inches of snow. I woke up early again, determined to clear everything before Patricia could start her nonsense. But when I opened my garage door, I found that someone had already piled a massive amount of snow directly behind my truck, blocking me in. Through the pre-dawn darkness, I could see Patricia watching from her window. It took me 45 minutes to clear enough space to get my truck out, and I was late to work for the second day in a row. My boss was not happy. When I got home that evening, there was another notice on my door, this time with a $50 fine for repeated violations of snow removal protocols. This went on for 5 more days. Every morning, I would wake up to find snow piled on my driveway. Every evening, I would come home to find more snow and another threatening notice from the HOA. Patricia had even started taking photos of my violations and posting them in the neighborhood Facebook group, making passive-aggressive comments about how some residents refused to maintain their properties appropriately. Other neighbors started giving me dirty looks. Some of them left comments on the posts supporting Patricia, saying things like rules are rules, and if everyone else can follow them, why can't you? Nobody seemed to care when I tried to explain that Patricia was the one creating the problem. A few neighbors privately messaged me saying they believed me and that Patricia had pulled similar stunts with others, but none of them were willing to speak up publicly. They were too afraid of becoming her next target. I tried going above Patricia's head by looking into the HOA's structure, but I quickly learned that she had stacked the board with her friends. The vice president was her sister-in-law, the treasurer was her former college roommate, and the secretary was someone who owed Patricia a favor after she helped get their son into some prestigious prep school. It was a complete power circle with no accountability. On the 7th day of this madness, I woke up to find that Patricia had escalated. She had apparently been out there since 4 in the morning, and she hadn't just put snow on my driveway. She had built a literal wall of snow across the entire width of my driveway, at least 4 feet tall and several feet deep. Getting out would require hours of work. That was it. I had reached my limit. I called in sick to work, which I hated doing because I had already been late so many times that week. Then I went to my garage and looked at my options. I had a regular snow shovel, a roof rake, and an old lawn mower that wouldn't help at all. Shoveling would take forever, and Patricia would probably just add more snow while I worked. Then I remembered that my buddy Chris lived just outside the HOA boundaries, about 2 miles away. Chris owned a small landscaping business, and more importantly, he had a pickup truck with a commercial-grade snow plow attachment. I called him and explained the situation. He laughed so hard I thought he was going to drop the phone. "You're telling me this lady has been dumping snow on your driveway for a week straight?" he asked between laughs. "It's not funny, man. I'm about to lose my job over this." "Oh, it's definitely funny, but I feel for you. Tell you what, I'll bring the truck over. Let's take care of this problem." Chris showed up about 30 minutes later with his F-250, plow attachment gleaming in the morning sun. The truck was a beast, designed to clear commercial parking lots and long driveways. It was complete overkill for a residential street, which made it absolutely perfect for what I had in mind. "So what's the plan?" Chris asked as he climbed out of the truck. "First, we clear my driveway completely. Then I want you to teach me how to operate that plow." He raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking, Daniel?" "I'm thinking that if Patricia wants to play games with snow, we should give her a real winter wonderland." Chris grinned. "I like where your head's at, but are you sure? This could get messy." "It's already messy. She's left me with no choice." We spent the next hour clearing my driveway, sidewalk, and the area around my garage. Chris showed me the basics of operating the plow, how to angle it, how to control the hydraulics, and where to position the truck for maximum efficiency. It wasn't rocket science, but it did require some finesse. While we worked, Patricia came out of her house. She stood at the end of her driveway with her arms crossed, watching us with this smug expression. When we finished, she actually had the audacity to wave. "Thanks for cleaning up your mess, Daniel," she called out. "Maybe now you'll start following the community standards." I didn't respond. I just smiled and waved back, which seemed to confuse her. She went back inside, probably thinking she had won. Chris left around noon, but he told me to keep the truck for the day. "Just bring it back tomorrow," he said. "And try not to do anything too crazy." "All right, define too crazy," I replied. "I'm serious, man. Don't do anything that could get you in legal trouble." "I'm just going to relocate some snow. Last time I checked, that's not illegal." He shook his head but was smiling. "Your funeral. Call me if you need bail money." After Chris left, I spent the afternoon gathering evidence. I set up my outdoor security camera to face the street, making sure it captured both my driveway and Patricia's house. I went through all the notices she had given me and scanned them into my computer. I took photos of the snow wall she had built across my driveway that morning, making sure to timestamp everything. I also started a detailed log of every incident, including dates, times, and descriptions of what happened. Around 3 in the afternoon, it started snowing again. By 5 o'clock, we had another 3 inches of fresh powder covering everything. Perfect. I waited until Patricia had finished clearing her own driveway, which she did meticulously as always. I watched through my window as she made her neat little piles, swept her sidewalk, and even used some kind of leaf blower to get the light dusting off her porch. When she finally went back inside, satisfied with her work, I made my move. I bundled up in my warmest clothes, grabbed the keys to Chris's truck, and fired up that beast of a machine. The engine rumbled to life with a deep, powerful sound that echoed down the quiet street. I adjusted the plow angle, took a deep breath, and started working. First, I cleared the new snow from my own property, pushing it into neat piles on the edges of my lawn where it wouldn't bother anyone. Then I cleared the sidewalk in front of my house again, making everything look pristine. I wanted there to be absolutely no question that I was maintaining my property correctly. Then came the fun part. I positioned the truck at the end of Patricia's driveway and started pushing. I took every single pile of snow that she had so carefully arranged on her lawn and relocated it. The plow cut through the snow like butter, and within minutes, I had pushed a massive amount of white powder right up onto her front walkway. But I didn't stop there. Patricia had made my life miserable for a week straight. She had cost me time, money, and nearly my job. She had humiliated me in front of my neighbors and abused her authority as HOA president. If she wanted snow, I was going to give her snow. I made another pass, pushing even more snow from her lawn onto her walkway and then up onto her porch. The plow was powerful enough to really pile it high, and I worked methodically, making sure to clear every bit of snow from her yard and relocate it to where it would cause her the maximum inconvenience. By the time I was finished, Patricia's porch was buried under approximately 4 feet of densely packed snow. Her front door was completely blocked. The steps leading up to the porch were invisible beneath the white mass. I had essentially created the same situation she had created for me that morning, except worse. I parked Chris's truck back in my own driveway and went inside, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I felt simultaneously triumphant and nervous. Had I gone too far? Probably. Did she deserve it? Absolutely. I didn't have to wait long for Patricia's reaction. About 10 minutes later, I heard shouting from across the street. I looked out my window to see her standing in her yard, staring at her buried porch in absolute shock. Her face was red, and even from across the street, I could see that she was shaking with rage. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. First, she tried pushing the snow away with her hands, which was completely futile. Then she went to her garage and got her shovel, but the amount of snow was so massive that she quickly realized it would take hours to clear. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "You've made a terrible mistake, Daniel." Patricia's voice came through, cold and threatening. "I don't know how you blocked my porch, but I have witnesses. This is destruction of property, harassment, and violation of at least a dozen HOA bylaws. I'm calling the police right now, and I'm going to make sure you're removed from this neighborhood." "Funny. I was just thinking the same thing," I replied calmly. "About the police, I mean. I've got a week's worth of evidence showing you deliberately sabotaging my property, causing me to be late to work multiple times, and abusing your authority as HOA president. I've got photos, timestamps, security footage, and documentation of every single incident. So please go ahead and call the police. I'd love to have an official record of all this." There was silence on the other end of the line. "You're bluffing," she finally said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Am I? Try me. I've got video of you dumping snow on my driveway at 5 in the morning. I've got photos of the snow wall you built this morning. I've got copies of all your bogus violation notices. I even started a log with detailed descriptions of everything you've done. So please, call the cops. While you're at it, maybe we can talk about how you've been harassing me and creating hazardous conditions." She hung up without another word. I watched from my window as Patricia stood in her yard, phone in hand, clearly debating what to do. She looked at her buried porch, then at my house, then back at her porch. After a few minutes, she started shoveling, attacking the snow with furious energy. It was dark by the time she finished clearing a path to her front door, and I could see her exhaustion from across the street. Part of me felt a little bad. But then I remembered the week of harassment, the threatening notices, the public humiliation, and the fact that I had almost lost my job because of her petty power trip. My sympathy evaporated. That night I barely slept. I kept expecting police to show up at my door, or for something terrible to happen. But nothing did. The night passed quietly, and when morning came, I was exhausted but relieved. I returned Chris's truck first thing in the morning, thanking him profusely for the help. He asked how it went, and when I told him, he burst out laughing again. "Man, I wish I could have seen her face," he said. "But seriously, watch your back. People like that don't just let things go." He was right. When I got home, there was a certified letter waiting for me. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA stating that I was being fined $500 for unauthorized snow removal operations, creating hazardous conditions, harassment of HOA officials, and use of commercial equipment in a residential zone without proper permits. The letter demanded payment within 7 days and threatened legal action if I didn't comply. I had expected something like this, so I was prepared. I spent that morning composing a detailed response letter. I outlined every single incident of Patricia's harassment, attached printouts of photos and video stills from my security camera, and included copies of all the violation notices she had given me. I pointed out that she had never provided any evidence of my supposed violations, while I had extensive documentation of her misconduct. I also did some research into Colorado HOA laws and discovered that HOA board members could be held personally liable for harassment and abuse of authority. I included relevant statutes in my letter and made it very clear that if the HOA pursued any action against me, I would be filing a counter-complaint not just against Patricia personally, but against the entire board for enabling her behavior. I sent the letter via certified mail to Patricia, to each board member individually, and to the HOA's registered agent. I also sent a copy to a lawyer friend of mine, asking him to review the situation and let me know if I needed formal legal representation. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I received a phone call from Richard Martinez, the HOA's treasurer and one of Patricia's board allies. His tone was conciliatory, almost nervous. "Daniel, hi, this is Richard from the HOA board. I wanted to reach out about the recent situation with Patricia." "You mean the situation where she spent a week harassing me and I finally defended myself?" "Yes, well, we've reviewed your letter and the evidence you provided. I want you to know that the board takes these matters very seriously." "That's interesting, because none of you seemed to care when Patricia was targeting me." "I understand your frustration. The thing is, we weren't aware of the full extent of the situation. Patricia handles most of the day-to-day enforcement, and we trust her judgment. We didn't know she was acting inappropriately." "So what now?" "We'd like to resolve this matter amicably. We're willing to void the fines against you and consider this a mutual misunderstanding. In exchange, we ask that you not pursue any further action and that we can all move forward as a community." A mutual misunderstanding. "Richard, this woman harassed me for a week straight. She cost me sleep, stress, and nearly my job. She abused her authority and then tried to fine me for defending myself. That's not a misunderstanding. That's targeted harassment." "I hear you, Daniel. I really do. What would you like to see happen here?" That was a good question. What did I want? Part of me wanted Patricia removed from the HOA board entirely. Part of me wanted a public apology. But mostly, I just wanted to be left alone. First, I want all fines and violations against me voided and expunged from HOA records, I said. Second, I want a formal letter from the board acknowledging that Patricia's actions were inappropriate and that I acted in self-defense. Third, I want assurance that this kind of harassment won't happen again, not just to me but to any resident. Those seem like reasonable requests. Let me talk to the rest of the board and get back to you. We hung up, and I felt a small sense of victory. But I knew this wasn't over. People like Patricia didn't just back down because someone asked them nicely. Sure enough, that evening I found out that Patricia had been telling her version of the story to anyone who would listen. According to her, I was an aggressive, unstable neighbor who had viciously attacked her property with a snow plow in an unprovoked assault. She claimed to have been terrified for her safety and said that I had threatened her during our phone conversation. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with arguments. Some people believed Patricia's version, especially those who didn't know me well. Others were more skeptical, pointing out that Patricia had a history of conflicts with neighbors. A few people even came forward with their own stories of HOA harassment, though most were careful not to directly name Patricia. My lawyer friend, Greg Thompson, called me that evening after reviewing all the documents I had sent him. "Daniel, this is actually a pretty solid case," he said. "You've got clear evidence of harassment, abuse of authority, and you've documented everything properly. If this goes to court, I think you'd have a good chance of winning." "I don't want to go to court, Greg. I just want this to end." "I understand, but you should be prepared for that possibility. From what you've told me about this Patricia woman, she sounds like the type who would rather burn everything down than admit she was wrong. If the HOA doesn't rein her in, you might not have a choice. What would a court case look like?" "You could sue the HOA for harassment and emotional distress. You might also have grounds for a civil rights claim if you can demonstrate that she was selectively enforcing rules against you. Colorado has pretty strong protections for homeowners against abusive HOAs. The problem is that these cases can drag on for months or even years, and they're expensive." "How expensive?" "Could be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 in legal fees, depending on how complicated it gets. And that's if you win. If you lose, you're out that money plus whatever the court orders you to pay." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't have that kind of money lying around. So basically, even if I'm right, Patricia can just bury me in legal costs. Unfortunately, that's often how these things work. The HOA has a legal fund that's paid for by everyone's dues, so Patricia can spend that money without it affecting her personally. You'd be paying out of pocket. It's not fair, but it's reality. So what do I do? Try to settle this outside of court if possible. If the board is willing to work with you, take the deal. If Patricia pushes this further, we'll deal with it then. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. Every interaction, every conversation, every incident. If this does go legal, we want an airtight case. Over the next few days, the tension in the neighborhood was thick enough to cut with a knife. Patricia continued to talk about me to anyone who would listen, painting me as some kind of dangerous criminal. I tried to stay quiet and let my evidence speak for itself, but it was hard to watch my reputation get shredded by someone who was blatantly lying. Then things took an unexpected turn. A woman named Sarah Chen, who lived 3 houses down from me, reached out via private message on Facebook. She asked if we could meet in person to talk. I agreed, and we met at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood. Sarah was in her 40s, a nurse who worked at Boulder Community Health. She seemed nervous as we sat down with our coffees. "I don't know if you remember me," she started. "We've waved to each other a few times, but we've never really talked." "I remember you," I said. "You have the garden with the blue flowers in summer, right?" She smiled. "That's me." "Look, I wanted to talk to you because I've been watching what's happening with Patricia, and I can't stay silent anymore. She did almost the exact same thing to me 2 years ago." "What do you mean?" It was during a different winter storm. "Patricia decided that I wasn't clearing my sidewalk fast enough, even though I work night shifts, and was literally asleep when she expected me to be out there shoveling at 6 in the morning. She started leaving violation notices, threatening fines, the whole thing. Then one day, I came home from work to find that someone had piled a huge amount of snow at the end of my driveway, blocking my car in. Let me guess, it was Patricia. I never could prove it, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it was her. When I complained to the HOA board, they dismissed it. Said there was no evidence, and that maybe a city plow had done it. But city plows don't carefully arrange snow in a perfect wall across a specific driveway. I ended up just paying the fines and keeping my head down because I couldn't afford to fight it. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw what you did with the snow plow, and honestly, I cheered. Someone finally stood up to her. But I also know Patricia won't let this go. She's vindictive and she holds grudges forever, so I wanted to offer to help. I kept all the documentation from my situation. Violation notices, photos, emails. If you need someone to testify that Patricia has a pattern of this behavior, I'll do it." I was genuinely moved. "Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot. Can I ask why you're willing to stick your neck out now when you weren't before?" She sighed. "Because I'm tired of being afraid of my HOA president. This is my home. I pay my dues, I follow the rules, and I shouldn't have to live in fear that someone with a grudge and a title can make my life hell. What Patricia is doing isn't right, and more people need to say so." "Have other people had problems with her?" "Oh yeah. There's at least half a dozen homeowners I know of who have been targeted. Most people just comply because it's easier than fighting. But there's this couple, the Johnsons, who actually moved out of the neighborhood because Patricia made their lives so miserable. They had painted their front door a shade of blue that Patricia claimed violated the HOA covenants, even though the covenants didn't specify exact color codes. She fined them repeatedly, and when they fought back, she started finding other violations. Their lawn, their mailbox, their garden decorations. It never ended. Eventually, they just sold their house and left. That's insane. Welcome to Meadowbrook Heights under Patricia's rule. Some of us have talked about trying to vote her out at the next election, but she's got enough friends on the board that it's basically impossible. Plus, most people are too scared of becoming her next target to openly oppose her. Sarah and I talked for another hour. She gave me copies of all her documentation and put me in touch with 2 other neighbors who had similar stories. By the time I left that coffee shop, I realized this was much bigger than just my snow plow incident. Patricia had been systematically harassing residents for years, and nobody had been able to stop her. That night, I got a call from Richard Martinez again. "Daniel, I've spoken with the board and we've come to a decision. We're willing to meet your 3 requests. All fines and violations against you will be voided. We'll provide a letter stating that the recent conflict was based on miscommunication and that you are in good standing with the HOA. And we'll be implementing new guidelines for how enforcement actions are handled to ensure fairness going forward." "What about Patricia? Is she facing any consequences for her actions?" There was a long pause. "The board has counseled Patricia about proper procedures. However, we don't feel that removal from her position is warranted at this time. She's served this community for years, and this is an isolated incident." "Isolated? Richard, I've been talking to other neighbors. This is not isolated. Patricia has been doing this to people for years. I'm not aware of any formal complaints along those lines." "That's because people are afraid to complain. They know she'll retaliate. Daniel, we're offering you a fair resolution. If you want to pursue further action against Patricia personally, that's between you and her. But from the HOA's perspective, we're willing to wipe the slate clean and move forward. I'd strongly encourage you to accept this offer. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to keep fighting, to push for Patricia's removal, but Greg's words about legal costs echoed in my mind. Could I really afford to wage a long battle against the HOA? Did I want to spend the next year of my life consumed by this conflict? I need time to think about it, I said. Fair enough. We'll need an answer by Monday. After hanging up, I called Greg and explained the situation. They're trying to sweep this under the rug, he said immediately. They know Patricia screwed up, but they don't want to deal with the fallout of actually holding her accountable. The question is whether you're willing to accept that. I don't know. What would you do? Honestly. If they're voiding the fines and giving you a letter clearing your name, I'd probably take it. You can't force them to remove Patricia, and trying to do so would mean a long, expensive fight. But here's what I would add. Ask them for a formal conflict resolution procedure to be written into the HOA bylaws, something that gives homeowners a real avenue to appeal enforcement decisions. That way, Patricia can't keep doing this to other people. That's a good idea. And keep all your documentation. If Patricia violates the agreement or comes after you again, you'll have everything you need to take legal action. Sometimes the best defense is making sure the other side knows you're prepared to fight if necessary. I spent the weekend agonizing over the decision. I talked to Sarah and the other neighbors Patricia had targeted, and opinions were mixed. Some thought I should push harder, try to get Patricia removed. Others thought I should take the deal and count myself lucky to escape without financial ruin. On Sunday evening, I made my decision. I called Richard back and told him I would accept the HOA's offer with one addition. I wanted them to implement a formal appeals process for enforcement decisions, where homeowners could present evidence to the full board and get a fair hearing. Richard agreed without much argument, which told me the board knew they were on shaky ground. The formal letter arrived by email on Tuesday. It was carefully worded to avoid admitting any real wrongdoing, but it did void all the violations and fines against me. It also stated that the HOA would be implementing new procedures for handling disputes. Not perfect, but better than nothing. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Patricia might have been forced to back down officially, but she wasn't done with me personally. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small acts of petty revenge. My newspaper would go missing in the mornings. Someone kept leaving dog waste in my yard, even though I didn't have a dog. My mailbox was vandalized with spray paint. Nothing I could definitively prove was Patricia, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidence. I installed more security cameras, covering every angle of my property. Sure enough, I caught Patricia on video at 2 in the morning, creeping across the street to leave a bag of garbage on my front porch. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. It was her jacket, her shoes, her distinctive walk. I saved the video and called the police non-emergency line. I explained the situation and asked if I could file a report for harassment. The officer who took my call was sympathetic but not particularly helpful. Unless she's threatening violence or doing significant property damage, this is really a civil matter, he explained. You could try getting a restraining order if the harassment continues, but a judge might not grant it based on what you've described. So she can just keep doing this, and there's nothing I can do. You can document everything and sue her in civil court if you want. That's really your best option. More legal action, more money, more stress. I was so tired of all of it, that's when Sarah reached out again. A bunch of us are getting together to talk about the Patricia situation, she told me. We're meeting at my house Thursday night. Can you come? I showed up at Sarah's house to find 8 other neighbors there, all with their own stories of Patricia's harassment. There was Mike Anderson, who had been fined for having a basketball hoop in his driveway. There was Jennifer Wu, who had been cited for hanging Christmas lights outside the approved display period. There was Robert and Linda Hayes, who had been reported to code enforcement for having an unauthorized structure that turned out to be their kids' playhouse. We spent 3 hours sharing stories, and a pattern emerged. Patricia specifically targeted people she perceived as unable or unwilling to fight back. Single homeowners, young families with kids, people who worked long hours and didn't have time to deal with HOA drama. She avoided confrontation with anyone who seemed likely to push back hard, like lawyers, politicians, or anyone with obvious resources. "So what do we do?" Jennifer asked. "We can't all just move away. This is our neighborhood. We need to remove her from the board," Mike said. "That's the only real solution." "How?" "She controls the votes," Robert pointed out. Sarah spoke up. "According to the HOA bylaws, the president can be removed by a vote of the general membership if 20% of homeowners sign a petition calling for a special election. We've got 9 people here. There are 47 homes in the neighborhood. We need support from at least 10 homes total to trigger the vote. Then we need a majority of homeowners to actually vote her out." "That seems doable," I said. "We've got 9 homes represented right here. We just need 1 more to sign the petition." "The hard part is getting people to actually vote," Sarah said. "A lot of homeowners don't come to meetings or participate in HOA business. If turnout is low, Patricia's friends will control the outcome." We spent the rest of the evening strategizing. We divided up the neighborhood and each agreed to talk to specific neighbors, feeling out who might be willing to support removing Patricia. We also agreed to be careful and discreet. If Patricia found out what we were planning before we had enough support, she would retaliate. Over the next 2 weeks, I had some of the most eye-opening conversations of my life. It turned out that almost everyone in the neighborhood had a Patricia story. Some were relatively minor, like getting nitpicky violation notices. Others were serious, like the elderly man who had been fined while recovering from surgery because his lawn went unmowed for 10 days. His adult daughter had come to stay with him and was taking care of the property. But Patricia had cited him anyway and refused to grant an extension. The more I talked to people, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about snow or parking or lawn height. This was about a person who had been given a small amount of authority and had used it to bully and control people for years. The HOA was supposed to maintain property values and handle community resources, not serve as Patricia's personal fiefdom. We got our 10 signatures easily. In fact, we got 23, nearly half the neighborhood. The petition was submitted to the HOA board on a Wednesday afternoon, and by that evening, Patricia was calling me. "You have no idea what you've started," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you can undermine me, turn my neighbors against me. I've given years of my life to this community, and this is how you repay me. Patricia, this isn't about you personally. This is about accountability and fair treatment for all homeowners. Don't give me that garbage. This is a vendetta because I hurt your precious feelings over some snow." "Well, you're going to regret this, Daniel. I promise you that." "Is that a threat?" She hung up. The special election was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Under the bylaws, it had to be held within 30 days of a valid petition being submitted. The HOA was required to notify all homeowners and provide information about the vote. The board tried to schedule it on a weeknight evening, when they knew many people would be unable to attend, but we pushed back and got it moved to a Saturday morning. Those 3 weeks were intense. Patricia launched a full-scale campaign to save her position. She sent out a glossy mailer to every home, listing all the accomplishments of her tenure as president. She held a meet and greet at her house, inviting supporters to come discuss the future of our community. She even created a website defending her record and attacking those of us who had signed the petition. My name was prominent on her website. She didn't directly lie, but she twisted every fact to make me look like a troublemaker who had moved into a peaceful neighborhood and immediately started causing problems. She framed the snow plow incident as an act of property destruction and claimed I had threatened her safety. She posted selective portions of our phone conversations, edited to remove context, but we weren't sitting idle. Sarah created a simple website of our own, laying out the case for why Patricia needed to be removed. We kept it factual, focusing on specific incidents and patterns of behavior. We didn't attack Patricia personally, instead framing it as a question of governance and fairness. Mike, who worked in marketing, designed a one-page flyer explaining the issues and encouraging people to vote. We hand-delivered them to every house in the neighborhood. The day before the election, I got an unexpected call from Patricia's sister-in-law, Deanne, who was the HOA vice president. "Daniel, can we talk off the record?" she asked. "I guess so." "Look, I know Patricia has been difficult. I've tried to moderate her behavior, but she doesn't always listen. The thing is, she's not really a bad person. She's just very passionate about maintaining the neighborhood." "Deanne, with all due respect, there's a difference between being passionate and being abusive. Patricia has made people's lives miserable." "I know. I've heard some of the stories and I believe you. But if she loses this vote, it's going to destroy her. Being HOA president is her whole identity. Her kids are grown, her husband travels for work, and she doesn't have much else going on. This community is everything to her. That's not a reason to let her keep abusing her authority." "I'm not saying it is. I'm just asking you to consider what happens after the vote. If Patricia loses, she's going to be devastated and angry. She's still going to live here. You're still going to be neighbors. This could get ugly." "It's already ugly, Deanne," she sighed. "Fair enough. I just wanted to try. Good luck tomorrow." Saturday morning arrived clear and cold. The election was being held at the neighborhood clubhouse, a small building near the community park that was usually used for HOA meetings and the occasional private event. Voting was open from 9 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, with results to be announced at 2. I showed up at 9 sharp and was surprised to see a line of people waiting to vote. The turnout was already much higher than normal HOA elections, which usually drew maybe a dozen residents. By 10 o'clock, over 30 people had cast ballots. Patricia was there, of course, positioned near the entrance where she could see everyone who came in. She glared at me when I arrived but didn't say anything. Her supporters were there too, including her friends from the board, all wearing matching blue ribbons that said, "Keep Meadowbrook Strong." Our group had our own presence. Sarah had organized volunteers to stand outside the clubhouse, not campaigning since that wasn't allowed within a certain distance, but being visible and friendly. We wanted people to know that this wasn't just a few troublemakers, but a genuine community movement. I cast my ballot and then stayed to observe. The atmosphere was tense but civil. People chatted quietly, neighbors who hadn't spoken in years finding themselves on opposite sides of this issue. Some of Patricia's supporters gave me dirty looks. Others approached me quietly and said they supported what we were doing but couldn't publicly take sides. By noon, over 40 households had voted, an unprecedented turnout for HOA business. At 1 o'clock, Voting officially closed and the counting began. Per the bylaws, the votes were counted by the HOA secretary, with representatives from both sides allowed to observe. Sarah and I watched for our side. Patricia insisted on watching personally. The secretary, a timid woman named Carol who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, emptied the ballot box and began sorting the votes. There were 43 ballots in total, representing an incredible 91% of the neighborhood. As Carol counted aloud, the result quickly became clear. The vote wasn't even close. 28 residents voted to remove Patricia as president. 15 voted to keep her. The motion carried by a clear majority. Patricia's face went white, then red. "This is impossible," she said. "You must have counted wrong." "I counted twice," Carol said quietly. "The result is accurate. I demand a recount." "The bylaws allow for a recount if the margin is less than 5 votes, Deanne said gently, placing a hand on Patricia's arm. "This wasn't close, Patricia. I'm sorry." Patricia jerked away from her. "You're all making a terrible mistake. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without proper leadership. You'll see. Within 6 months, property values will plummet, the common areas will be in shambles, and you'll be begging me to come back." "Patricia, please," Deanne said. But Patricia was already storming out, her supporters trailing behind her. Through the window, I could see her standing in the parking lot, crying and yelling at the small group gathered around her. Inside the clubhouse, there was a collective exhale. We had done it. Against all odds, we had actually voted Patricia out. But Diane's warning echoed in my mind. What happens now? The answer came sooner than I expected. The next morning, I woke up to find my car had been keyed. Long, deliberate scratches ran along both sides, the kind that would cost hundreds of dollars to repair. My security camera had caught the vandalism happening around 3 in the morning, but the person who did it had worn dark clothing and a mask. I couldn't see their face, but I recognized Patricia's distinctive walking style. I filed a police report and submitted the video evidence. The officer who took my report was more interested this time, since keying a car was clear property damage, not just petty harassment. "We'll investigate," he promised. "But I have to be honest, unless we can definitively identify the person on camera, it's hard to press charges." A defense attorney would argue that recognizing someone by their walk isn't reliable identification. "So she gets away with it." I didn't say that. "We'll talk to her, and sometimes just having police involvement is enough to make people back off. Also, you can file an insurance claim for the damage." That afternoon, 2 officers visited Patricia. I watched from my window as they spoke to her on her porch for about 15 minutes. She was animated, gesturing emphatically, clearly upset. When the officers left, Patricia stood on her porch staring at my house for a long time. The next few days were eerily quiet. Patricia didn't come outside much. When she did, she avoided eye contact with everyone. The neighborhood Facebook group was full of discussion about the election and what should happen next. The HOA board had to appoint an interim president until the next regular election in 6 months. Sarah was appointed as interim president by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members. Her first action was to create the appeals process I had requested, giving homeowners a real way to challenge enforcement decisions. Her second action was to review all outstanding violations and fines from the past year. Several were quietly voided, including some against people who had already paid them. I thought maybe things were finally settling down. Then, on a Thursday evening, I came home from work to find my front door standing open. My heart racing, I called the police and waited in my truck until they arrived. 2 officers cleared my house and confirmed what I had feared. Someone had broken in. The strange thing was that nothing appeared to be missing. My TV was still there, my laptop still on my desk, my wallet still in the bedroom where I had left it that morning. But things had been moved. Drawers were opened, papers scattered, furniture slightly out of place. It was clear someone had gone through my belongings, but they hadn't taken anything. "This is weird," one of the officers said. "Most burglars grab the obvious valuable stuff and get out. This looks more like someone was searching for something specific." I knew immediately what had happened. Patricia had been looking for the documentation I had gathered. The photos, videos, and records of her harassment. She wanted to destroy the evidence. What she didn't know was that I had backed everything up to cloud storage. Even if she had found and destroyed my physical copies, the digital files were safe. I mentioned to the officers that I had been having ongoing issues with a neighbor and explained the situation. They took notes and said they would follow up. They also suggested I get my locks changed and consider a home security system. That night, I didn't sleep in my house. The thought of Patricia having possibly made a copy of my key was too unsettling. I stayed at Chris's place, and the next morning, I had a locksmith change all my locks. I also upgraded my security system, adding cameras inside my house in addition to the exterior ones. Sarah called me that afternoon, her voice shaken. "Daniel, I need to tell you something. Patricia came to my house this morning. She was screaming at me, saying I stole her position and destroyed her life. She accused me of being part of some conspiracy against her. It was really scary. My husband had to threaten to call the police before she would leave." "Did you call the police?" "We did. They came out and talked to her. They said they warned her that if she continues this behavior, she could be charged with harassment." "Good." "Sarah, I think she might have broken into my house yesterday." "What? Oh my God, are you serious?" I explained what had happened. Sarah was horrified. "She's completely losing it. We need to do something before this escalates even more." "But what could we do?" Patricia hadn't been definitively caught for the car keying or the break-in. She was being investigated, but investigation didn't mean consequences. The situation came to a head the following Monday. I was at work when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Is this Daniel Harrison?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Officer Jennifer Ramirez with Boulder Police. I need to inform you that we've arrested Patricia Hendricks in connection with multiple incidents of vandalism and harassment in your neighborhood. We're going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement." I was stunned. "She's arrested. What happened?" "She was caught on camera vandalizing another resident's property this morning. When we brought her in for questioning, she made some statements that gave us probable cause to search her home. We found evidence linking her to the damage to your vehicle and potentially your home break-in. I can't give you more details than that right now, but we'd like to get your statement as soon as possible." I left work immediately and drove to the Boulder Police Department. At the station, Officer Ramirez explained what had happened. Patricia had apparently vandalized Mike Anderson's property that morning, spray painting profanities on his garage door. Mike's security camera caught the whole thing in broad daylight, showing Patricia's face clearly. When police arrived to arrest her, Patricia had completely melted down. She had ranted about how the neighborhood had turned against her, how we had ruined her life, how she was going to make us all pay. In her rage, she had admitted to keying my car and breaking into my house, thinking she was justifying her actions. She basically confessed to multiple crimes while we were arresting her, Officer Ramirez said. When we searched her home with a warrant, we found the can of spray paint she used on Mr. Anderson's garage, a mask matching the one worn by the person who keyed your car, and a folder containing printed copies of posts from your neighborhood Facebook group with notes in the margins. Some of those notes were pretty disturbing. What kind of notes? Comments about wanting to drive certain people out of the neighborhood, plans for how to make specific residents' lives difficult, that sort of thing. Look, I can't share everything we found, but this goes beyond HOA drama. Miss Hendricks has been engaging in sustained harassment and criminal behavior. The district attorney is reviewing the case now. I gave my formal statement, providing all the documentation I had gathered over the past month. Officer Ramirez assured me that the police were taking this seriously, and that Patricia would likely be facing multiple charges. Patricia was released on bail the next day, but the court had imposed a restraining order keeping her at least 500 feet away from me, Sarah, Mike, and several other neighbors. She was also prohibited from contacting any of us directly or indirectly. The neighborhood was in shock. News of Patricia's arrest spread quickly, and suddenly everyone had an opinion. Some people felt sorry for her, saying she had obviously been under too much stress and had broken down. Others, particularly those she had targeted over the years, felt vindicated. A few people tried to defend her actions, saying we had pushed her too far, but those voices were quickly drowned out. Patricia's husband, who I had rarely seen during my 3 years in the neighborhood, put their house on the market within 2 weeks of her arrest. The few times I saw him, he looked exhausted and embarrassed. I actually felt bad for the guy. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he was dealing with the fallout of his wife's behavior. The legal process moved slowly. Patricia was charged with criminal mischief, criminal trespass, and harassment. Her lawyer tried to get a plea deal, but the DA's office insisted on jail time given the sustained nature of her actions and the number of victims. According to Greg, who was following the case for me, Patricia was facing up to 18 months in jail if convicted on all counts. The case finally went to trial 4 months after her arrest. I had to testify, which was nerve-wracking but necessary. I walked the jury through everything that had happened, from the snow incidents to the vandalism to the break-in. Other neighbors testified too, painting a picture of someone who had abused her authority and then escalated to criminal behavior when she lost that authority. Patricia's defense tried to argue that she had been under extreme emotional distress and that her actions were a result of mental health issues. They brought in a psychologist who testified that Patricia had been experiencing a breakdown. While that might have been true, the prosecution argued that mental health struggles didn't excuse criminal behavior, especially sustained, targeted harassment. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for about 4 hours before returning a verdict, guilty on all counts. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge was stern. "Miss Hendricks, you were given a position of trust within your community, and you abused that trust repeatedly. When residents tried to hold you accountable through proper channels, you responded with harassment and criminal behavior. Your actions created fear and distress for multiple families in your neighborhood. I cannot overlook the serious nature of these crimes." Patricia was sentenced to 1 year in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to me and the other victims for the damage she had caused. The judge recommended that, during her probation, she seek counseling for anger management and whatever underlying issues had led to her behavior. As Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked small and defeated. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy. This had all spiraled so far beyond a snow dispute. But then, I remembered the fear I had felt coming home to find my house broken into, the frustration of dealing with her harassment, and the fact that she had terrorized multiple families for years. Justice was being served. Patricia's house sold a month after sentencing. Her husband moved to Denver to be closer to his kids from a previous marriage. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they were getting divorced, though I don't know if that was actually true. Sarah did an excellent job as interim HOA president. She reformed the violation and fine process, making it more transparent and fair. She established regular office hours where homeowners could come discuss concerns directly. She even organized neighborhood events to help rebuild community spirit after the drama of the past months. When the regular HOA election came around 6 months after Patricia's removal, Sarah ran for president officially and won in a landslide. The other board positions were filled by reasonable, level-headed neighbors who wanted to serve the community, not control it. My life gradually returned to normal. I got my car repaired. I threw myself into work and got a promotion I had been hoping for. Chris and I started a tradition of grabbing beers every Thursday after work. I even started dating someone I met through a friend, though that's a different story entirely. One evening about a year after everything had happened, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying the cool spring air when Sarah walked over from her house. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Of course not. She sat down on the steps next to me, and we were quiet for a moment, just enjoying the peaceful evening. "You know, I've been thinking," Sarah said. "A year ago, we were all terrified of our HOA president. We were afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge her, afraid of what might happen if we made waves. And look at us now. The neighborhood is actually nice again." "It took a lot of people being brave," I said. "You especially. You were the one who really organized everything. You were the one who stood up to her first. That snow plow thing was either the bravest or the dumbest thing I've ever seen." I laughed. "Probably both. But it showed everyone else that Patricia wasn't invincible, that she could be challenged. Without that, I don't think any of this would have happened." We sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. Across the street, a new family was moving into Patricia's old house. They had a couple of young kids who were running around the front yard, laughing and playing. It was a good sound, full of life and energy. "I should get back," Sarah said, standing up, "but I wanted to say thank you for everything you did. This is our neighborhood again, and that matters." After she left, I stayed on my porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the air had that perfect spring coolness that made you want to stay outside just a little longer. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The frustration, the fear, the anger, the stress. The legal battles and the sleepless nights, and the moment I found my front door standing open. It had been one of the hardest periods of my life, but I also thought about the community we had built in the aftermath. The neighbors who had found their voices. The friendships that had formed through shared struggle. The knowledge that when something was wrong, we could work together to fix it. Living in an HOA would probably never be perfect. There would always be rules and regulations, meetings and votes, disagreements about how things should be done. But at least now there was fairness. There was accountability. There was a community that looked out for each other instead of living in fear. And Patricia, I didn't hate her, even after everything. I actually hoped she was getting help and finding some peace. What she had done was wrong, and she had faced consequences for it, as she should have. But I could acknowledge that something had been broken in her too, some need for control or validation that had twisted into something toxic. The next winter, when the first big snow came, I was prepared. I had bought my own snowblower, a good one, and I had made arrangements with a few elderly neighbors to help clear their driveways too. When I woke up that first snowy morning, there was no dread, no anxiety about what might be waiting for me. I bundled up, fired up my snow blower, and got to work. The sun was just coming up, painting the snow pink and gold. My breath made clouds in the cold air. It was hard work but satisfying. Clean, simple, peaceful. When I finished my driveway, I moved on to Mr. Peterson's house next door. He was in his 80s and had arthritis. Then Mrs. Kim's house on the other side. She was a widow who worked long hours as a nurse. By the time I finished, the sun was fully up, and several other neighbors were outside doing the same thing. Mike was helping the Thompsons. Sarah was clearing the sidewalk in front of the community mailboxes. We waved to each other, exchanged morning greetings, compared notes on how much snow had fallen. It was just a normal winter morning in a normal neighborhood, people helping each other and going about their lives, and that's exactly what it should have been all along. As I put my snow blower away and headed inside for a hot cup of coffee, I realized that the whole ordeal had taught me something important. Community isn't about perfect rules perfectly enforced. It's not about control or authority or making sure everyone stays in line. It's about people choosing to take care of each other, to stand up for what's right, and to build something together that's bigger than any individual. The snow would keep falling every winter. That was just part of living in Colorado. But now, instead of being a source of conflict and fear, it was just snow. An inconvenience, sure, but one we dealt with together. And honestly, that made all the difference. My life in Meadowbrook Heights continued peacefully after that. I became more involved in the HOA in a positive way, attending meetings and volunteering for community improvement projects. The neighborhood flourished under Sarah's leadership. Property values actually increased, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because people wanted to live in a place where neighbors looked out for each other. I heard, through distant channels, that Patricia had been released from jail after serving 10 months of her sentence for good behavior. She moved to another state to live near her daughter and apparently started therapy. I hope she found peace and learned from what had happened. People can change, and everyone deserves a chance at redemption. As for me, that winter of conflict taught me more about standing up for yourself and others than any other experience in my life. It taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing to do. It taught me that community matters, that speaking up matters, and that one person willing to take a stand can inspire others to find their courage too. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Maybe I would have tried harder to resolve things peacefully before the snow plow incident. But honestly, I'm not sure Patricia would have responded to anything less than a dramatic demonstration that her behavior wouldn't be tolerated anymore. Sometimes you have to push back hard to make change happen. The story of the HOA president who kept shoveling snow onto my driveway became something of a legend in our neighborhood. New residents would hear about it and ask if it really happened. Kids would point out my house as they walked by. That's where the guy with the snow plow lives. I would just smile and wave, secure in the knowledge that I lived in a community where people weren't afraid anymore. Where rules existed to help everyone, not to give one person power over others. Where a neighborhood association actually did what it was supposed to do: bring people together instead of driving them apart. And every winter, when that first snow fell, I would look out my window at my clear driveway and my peaceful street. And I would remember that sometimes the biggest battles are fought not with grand gestures, but with simple acts of standing your ground and refusing to be intimidated. That's what home really means. Not just a house or a driveway or a yard, but a place where you're free to live your life without fear. A place where fairness matters more than authority. A place where neighbors are truly neighbors. And in the end, that's exactly what we had created in Meadowbrook Heights. not through following rules blindly, but through people coming together to build something better. It took a crisis to make it happen, and it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Years later, I'm still living in the same house. The new family that moved into Patricia's old place turned out to be wonderful neighbors. Their kids play street hockey in the summer and build snowmen in the winter. Sometimes I help them shovel their driveway, and sometimes they help me rake leaves in the fall. That's just what neighbors do. Sarah served 2 terms as HOA president, and then passed the torch to Mike Anderson, who continued the same fair, transparent approach to community governance. The neighborhood thrived, and the drama of that difficult winter became a story we told, but not one that defined us. Sometimes I run into people from other HOA neighborhoods who complain about their own situations. Petty rules, power-hungry board members, neighbors who weaponize regulations against each other. When they ask me how we fixed our problem, I tell them the truth. It took documentation, courage, community organizing, and a willingness to stand up to abuse of authority. But I also tell them about the snow plow. Because sometimes, the story people need to hear isn't just about legal processes and proper procedures. Sometimes, they need to hear that it's okay to push back, literally and figuratively, when someone is treating you unfairly. That justice isn't just about being right, it's about being willing to fight for what's right. The snow will always fall in Colorado. The HOA will always have rules. There will always be challenges and conflicts in any community. But how we handle those challenges, how we treat each other when things get difficult, that's what really matters. And in Meadowbrook Heights, we learn to handle them together as a real community should. That winter of conflict, that snow plow incident that seemed so dramatic at the time, it was really just the beginning of something better. A neighborhood finding its voice. A community learning to stand up for itself. People discovering that they didn't have to accept abuse from anyone, no matter what title that person held. So when people ask me about the HOA Karen who kept shoveling snow onto my driveway, and what happened when I plowed it back onto her porch, I smile and tell them the whole story. Not because I'm proud of escalating the conflict, but because I'm proud of what came after. The community we built, the friends we made, the neighborhood we created. That's the real ending to this story. Not revenge or conflict or legal battles, but community. People taking care of each other. Neighbors being neighbors. Home being truly home. And that, I think, is worth every shovelful of snow.